Welcome to the Generous Business Owner Podcast, where business owners gain inspiration and encouragement to live a legacy, not just leave one. And now your hosts, Jeff Thomas, Alan Barnhart, and Jeff Rutt.
Welcome, everybody, to this week's Generous Business Owner Podcast. My name's Jeff Thomas, and I've got my trusty sidekick, Jeff Rutt, with me today. Jeff, say hello to the people.
Hello to the people.
And we've got a very special guest this week, Bill Hall. Bill has had a long and storied career as a business executive, an engineer, a professor, a member of the military, and a financial planner. We'll get all of that and more and see what the common string is from Bill Hall. But Bill, thanks for joining us today.
Well, I'm glad to be here, and thank you for the opportunity to share.
Sure. Jeff, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, Bill, thank you for joining. Bill, share with us a little bit about the early years in the Hall family. What was that like? Tell us a little bit about formation of faith, education, any fun stories, especially related to business or just fun stories, period, in the early years.
Okay. Well, I was born at an early age, 1935, January 16th. So I just celebrated my 90th birthday. I still work 40, 50 hours a week as a financial planner. I have $160 million under management. My granddaughter works with me, and she's 50 years younger than I am. And our joke is that she's the brains and I'm the beauty. So once you get past that, everything else is up for grabs. But anyway, early on, I was, you might say, have the kind of sort of drug up and as opposed to raised up. My dad was a very hard worker who left home at age 14. He had like a 6th grade education. The two pieces of advice that he gave me were, you can't make it with your hands. You got to get an education. Mm. And when it came time to get an education, of course, there was no money. And so I worked my way through Georgia Tech on the co-op plan, where you work 3 months, go to school 3 months. And that's how I got my first degree. Other things, my dad would now be called a functioning alcoholic because on weekends, he would drink and he'd get in fights, and sometimes he won. He was a small guy, but he was strong because he was a mechanic and a welder. And then he would have like a Jekyll and Hyde experience Monday through Friday, be a wonderful dad. He'd be a hard worker, good husband, all the quality that you'd want in a dad. But then the weekends would come again. And so my mother is a small town, Okeechobee, Florida, maybe at that time, a couple of thousand people or maybe more. And she would get him out of jail on his own recognizance. So it was interesting. He was also a hunter and a fisherman. So whatever he brought home, we ate. And so we ate possum. I was fed caviar when I was very young. Fish roe is called.
Yeah.
It wasn't from sturgeon, of course. And nobody was paying $50 an ounce for it, or $100 an ounce. But we ate anything and everything, and everything. The only thing I didn't eat was rattlesnake, at least I don't remember. But then later in Denver at some fancy restaurant, I tried that as an adult. I found it pretty tasteless.
Yeah. So what were some of the early entrepreneurial experiences that you had?
My earliest experience was that my mom had died when I was 11, and I was at Boy Scout camp at 12, got it Boy Scouts, and I was at summer camp. So what I had observed was there was a big demand just before lunch or supper for candy. There was no supply because they didn't open the PX until after the meal was over. Then it was open. So then you could buy candy bars for a nickel, which now cost $1 or $2 or $1.50. And so I observed this and I decided, I could buy a bunch of candy bars. I had a net worth at that time of about $3 for 5 cents a piece. So I bought $3 worth of 5 cents a piece candy. And then before the next meal is up for sale, but it's 10 cents a piece. So I made 100% profit on my entrepreneurial experience there. In fact, my scoutmaster was so impressed with it that he took me out to dinner with another couple and his wife, just so I could be the entertainment, because this little shrimp was a natural born entrepreneur, apparently. But I also was a good marksman, and I won a knife for marksmanship. Later in the military, I had a little medal for marksmanship with a carbine.
Wow.
Then the other next entrepreneurial experience, my dad, there was no internet for dating sites, but they had the Lonely Hearts Club, which served as the internet. So my dad decided, I guess he needed a new wife and decided I needed a new mom. I didn't know that, but apparently he thought I did. So within 8 months, he invited a lady from Augusta, Georgia to come up and visit. They decided they were going to get married. And so soon, by July, I was down in Augusta, Georgia, living in semi-slum. Went from an apartment in Philadelphia down there, and I had a whole new set of in-laws and outlaws. And some of them did turn out to be outlaws later. But I still had not lost my entrepreneurial talents. So I had a red wagon. And of course, then not everybody had an automobile. So the supermarket, or what passed for a supermarket, the ladies would come out loaded with 2 arms full of bags of canned goods and fruit and vegetables and so on. And so I said, "Madam, I will take those in my wagon to your house or to your apartment." And so I would pull their groceries, and then I would get a tip, and the tips, I could make like $3 a day. And I started really early and worked really late. And near the end, when I was getting pretty close to my $3 mark, I started making bargains with the Lord. I decided, hey, God, if you can give me another couple of things, I'll give you half, not just 10%. Because at the time I was attending a Baptist church, and I had no idea what the preacher was talking about, except I did remember that you're supposed to give 10%. And of course, that was a consistent theme in the Baptist church. So early on, I was giving, but I was also like Abraham, negotiating with God to see if I could get a better deal.
Wow.
Bill, did you have siblings?
I had an older sister who was 9 years older. And of course, she had already graduated from high school and was working. So when my dad remarried, of course, she moved down to Florida, where we had some relatives down there. And so in effect, I was the equivalent of an only child, except when you have a sister that's 9 years older, you have the loving mother, and then you have the rule maker sister, who acts like a second mother, only mean.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, she loved me, and she was very good.
Now, where did Philadelphia come into play? Because I thought you were in Florida, and then did your dad move to Georgia? Where did Philadelphia happen?
Well, I was born in Clearwater, Florida, and I toddled out of there down to Okeechobee, Florida at the age of 2. And then my dad took a defense job in about when I was just finished the second grade.
Mhm.
So that would have been about 1942. Took a defense job in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And he went up there first, and then he sent word for us to come up. So we did. And so I went to school from the third grade until the fifth grade, but my mom was dying of cancer. And when you're 10 years old, you don't know those things,
Yeah.
and adults don't tell you. And so my dad shipped me off to a military academy at age, 10, and I was there 10 and 11, because my birthday's in the middle of January. So I had my year of military experience in the fifth grade, and then back to Philadelphia in the sixth grade, and then in Augusta, Georgia, seventh grade.
Did he move? He moved the whole family to where his new bride
The
was
whole
from?
family consisted of me and him.
Oh, so the two of you moved to Georgia to be with this woman, or was that?
Yeah, he
Yeah.
we went down where she married her. As soon as we arrived, we went down, and they had a marriage ceremony, civil ceremony, and she had two adult sons. One was later joined the military, became an officer, and the other one was a plumber and professional plumber.
What do you think? What do you think the biggest effect your childhood has had on you longer term?
Say again, which?
The longer term. How did that? That's not an easy childhood.
Well, the way.
What do you think you learned from that experience?
Well, what was interesting is, even though I was only 12, I pretty soon decided these were not my people.
Mhm.
And so I became very independent. Nobody mistreated me or anything like that. But we were living in a very poor section of town. My stepmother was what we now call an LVN, licensed vocational nurse. She worked at the hospital. My dad was a welder and a mechanic, as I've mentioned before. And I would say just becoming my own person, even at the age of 12. And I also got a job working at a grocery store. Of course, they just paid you cash. So they started at like 6 a.m. and worked to 9 p.m. And you got $3 out of the cash register for your pay.
So maybe let's skip ahead a little bit, Bill. So the co-op job, you're an engineer. What's the first job out of there?
First job out there was going to work for Shell Oil Company. As I said, I was working my way through. I got tired of 3 months in and 3 months out. So I said, look, I need a job for the summer. I said, you guys give me a job for the summer, and I will go to work for you when I get out of the Army, because I was in ROTC.
Gotcha.
And went into the Army immediately upon graduation. But I worked that summer out of Louisiana in Morgan, I think it was Morgan City.
Morgan City, I know it well.
No, let's see. No, it's Lake Charles, Louisiana.
Well, they're all in the kind of same.
Yeah,
Morgan City's where the work gets done for sure.
Yeah,
Some of it anyway.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
yeah. So what were you doing for Shell?
Well, for Shell, of course, what they do at Shell is they just throw you right in the middle of things, and I just did it whatever I was told. And so if I was out on a rig, what they did, the tool pusher, who is the name of the guy in charge, if you did the paperwork because you had some education, maybe more than he did, and then whenever a load of mud, which is 50-pound sacks, comes in, then you're offloading from the barge onto the rig these 50-pound sacks. And I weighed, soaking wet, weighed about 120 pounds. But I was pretty short. and pretty small, but I had enough muscle, so it wasn't bad. But you learn that when you start at the bottom, you're on the bottom. And it was fascinating because the guy that's called the tool pusher, or rather the driller was, we called him Captain Ahab because he would rewind and every piece of his long pieces of steel tubing are like spaghetti. And the guys are hand doing it. You know, it's very, very dangerous. But you're stupid when you're that young. You don't know how at risk you are. But one thing I did learn is they made chicory coffee. They'd put a pound of coffee, a pound of sugar, and fill the rest up with water, put it on the steam engine. This thing was steam engine driven, and boil it. And then they would serve little shots of that stuff in Dixie cups. So you took a shot of that, you had a full load of caffeine, sugar, boom. I mean, they're the first inventors of this stuff they now sell for significant money.
Okay, now you have such a long and storied career. We probably don't have time to hit every job and volunteer thing along the way. But before we started recording, I thought you were talking about something that was very interesting that I'd love for you to share about and maybe pull this string as you maybe summarize some of the other steps along the way that you've had. And you were just talking about listening. Can you sort of unpack, kind of share with our listeners this idea of generosity of attention and listening?
Yes, I think one of the keys to my success all the way along was being a careful listener. And then later, I actually studied listening and learned how to really listen. And listening is so much, and this is a phrase that I want everybody to remember, being listened to is so much like being loved that I can't tell the difference. And most people, when they're falling in love, they can't get enough listening to everything the other party says is wonderful, and they listen with full attention. And then they get married, and pretty soon after the honeymoon, they stop listening. And most of us, rather than listen, and when I'm talking about really listening, it's not waiting for your turn to speak. It's not judging what the other person is saying. It's not thinking of what you're going to say as soon as they stop talking, but it's trying to see the world through their eyes. And all of us have a bowl around our head. It's invisible, but inside that bowl, we're all looking at a video. And that video is our view of the world. That's our reality. The only way you can understand another person's reality is to truly, truly listen. Listen till you get a hernia. And you won't forget what they've said. Absolutely you won't, because you're really listening. You remember everything they said. All you have to do is every now and then, it's like spinning a plate. You just say, could you clarify that a little bit? Or let me summarize. And then you can play back. So by careful listening, I can listen to a scrambled egg of a problem, and I can separate the yolk from the white and come up with options.
I don't even want to interrupt you. I just want to listen. Now I feel now I'm on the hook. But how did you develop an interest in this? Somebody with an engineering background, I think of processes and this sort of thing, but they are problem solvers. When did this idea of listening well become a priority to you?
Well, it didn't come a priority until a friend of mine, his I have a degree from USC, a doctorate from USC, majored in management or leadership, minored in economics and finance. And he and I heard about this thing called, at that time, the Executive Committee. And we went, and my partner spoke at the meeting. There were 8 executives sitting around the table with a man named Bob Nurse, who was conducting as chairman of the group. And they were bringing up business problems, and the group would make suggestions as to these business problems. So we thought this was the greatest thing since sliced bread. And by the way, that was then later, we developed our end of it, came Vistage, and then Vistage became a $46,000 worldwide, multi-billion-dollar organization. But we were early on and a big part of that. But he came to California to see how we were doing. And so he went with me on the one-to-one with one of the CEOs. So we're coming out of the meeting. And of course, I'm thinking I'm pretty smart. I didn't realize at that time just how ignorant I was. And so I was expecting him to give me a nice compliment. I said, "So how did I do?" So his lesson in listening was, quote, "You talk too damn much," close quote. And I thought, oh. And so then is when I really started studying listening. It's real easy. You can look it up on the internet. Just look up active listening. Or it goes by a few names, and it'll tell you exactly the formula. It's easy to read the formula. It's like anything else. It's like being a chef. It's hard to execute because all of us are so used to being so enamored with our own words that we just can't bear to listen to somebody else.
Well, and I think, we were talking before we started recording, and that I have this little sticky note on my desk here, even in front of me, that talks about the forms of generosity: words, time, thoughts, money, things, influence, and attention. And I don't know that we've really done a podcast really focused on this idea of attention. So I'm really excited for you to keep unpacking this a little bit. And I do think it's a form of generosity, because I think if when we are not active listening, it's a form of selfishness, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. There's no greater gift than you can give anyone than your time. And the only way they really know that you're giving them your time if you are listening and paying attention to what they have to say and entering in to and trying to understand how they're viewing things. For example, even watching a TV program, which I seldom do because it's such a wasteland, you can at least converse about what they saw and how they saw it and why did they see it that way.
Right.
And so the generosity in listening is giving your time, giving your attention. And of course, from that, in my case, I learn what I don't ever lead with, "Oh, gee, I'm a Christian, I'm a nice guy." No, if I were a crook, the first place I'd go would be to church, because people can be terribly naive. They impute honesty and integrity to a quote, so what they consider to be a religious person, which is a total mistake, because some of the biggest frauds have been pulled off, like Madoff, of course.
Yeah.
Huge fraud. Who'd you play with? Charity, played on people's charity.
Yeah.
So very bad mistake, but giving attention, paying attention, you learn what do they give at all. And my wife and I initially, of course, we were both Christians, started off, with a tithing, and soon we moved up to 20%. eventually I started making some real money and 30%. And then when she passed away 3 years ago, we were giving 40 to 50% of our adjusted gross income every year. And my recommendation, if you're into generosity, do your giving while you're living. It's a lot more fun because you meet a lot of great people and help your family when they need the help. Not, who cares? I mean, I live to be 90, so somebody has to push me over a cliff to get rid of me.
Maybe talk a little about that giving journey. Maybe the faith journey. I think listening, to me, active listening is one of the most generous things you can do. And I think it's one of the most overlooked, this idea of attention. And I feel like, ironically, we have these things that are intended, social media and things that are intended to connect us. And in fact, we get kind of pulled apart. So this idea of spending time with someone, listening to them, not trying to feed them into your own sort of agenda, if you will, or worldview, and just listening is a bit of a lost art. So maybe take us through how does that listening journey maybe connect with your faith life and the rest of the way you look at generosity?
Well, the tying the listening into the giving, fundamentally, you have to have a principle when you're in business. When you're in business, you don't have, especially when you're an entrepreneur, you don't have a boss. You have the worst boss in the world. And he's the guy you shave every morning if you're a man. So you're looking at your boss eye to eye every morning. And then you go and listen to your clients, talk to clients, and they demand everything from you. My rule was, seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all these things will be added unto you. And that was whenever I got a call from a widow in financial planning, you end up with a lot of widows because men are not very durable. They die off. So you end up with the honey took care of everything. Well, you become the new honey.
The longer you work, the more women you have as clients.
Yeah, I do.
Fact. Yes, it's the fact. Yes.
So far, I'm averaging one death of a client per month this time. And last year, I was averaged about a death going to a memorial service or a celebration of life, they call it, every other month. And I evaluate those based on how good the food is. And also how well the widow has laid out the life and the significance of the deceased life. So
seek first the kingdom. Let's go back to that. So
seek first the kingdom. So you get a call, you're busy, you're really, really busy.
Right.
And you get a call and basically it's somebody needing help.
Yes.
Okay, you have to make a decision. Am I going to make that call back to the client that is paying me, or am I going to take the time now to take that call and try to minister to that person in whatever way they need to be ministered to? And people are so hungry to be listened to that I've had people meet with me one time and put me on as a trustee for their estate. Now, I wouldn't put my best friend on as a trustee for my estate without really checking him out. But you exhibit caring by listening, and you exhibit your integrity by listening. And in the business of financial planning, if you don't have commission on your breath, like some people used to talk about, well, don't have alcohol on your breath or whatever, or cigarettes on your breath. No, if you don't see people as a dollar mark, if you see people, as individuals who need help, and you see everybody as an individual that needs help. And if you're a Christian, you should be wanting to minister. And usually if you go to the typical pastor and you say, I want to dedicate my life to Christ and to the kingdom of God, well, you say, oh, great. We're going to put you in charge of teaching a class or something. No, you can, what about, you remember Christ said to the two Roman soldiers that came to him, he gave them advice. He didn't say, we need to convert you to Judaism. He just said, accuse no man falsely, and gave them one, and be satisfied with your wages. In other words, don't accept a bribe, is what he was saying. And so he told them to be the best soldiers, the best Roman soldiers they could be. And those guys were tough. They were tough. And so I think in our secular work, we be the best we can be is the best exhibit of whether our faith means anything. I never tell anybody I'm a Christian. I don't want to embarrass God if it turns out that I don't meet any kind of standard. Much better to let them figure it out, because if they can't figure it out, then I should stay quiet, because why should I give God a bad name?
I think there's so much wisdom in this idea of the gift, literally the gift of attention and time. You're right. Time plays into it too, because you need to have patience to listen well, right? And intentionality, and be others focused. And I know this is an area I can certainly improve in. And have you found that over time, because I'm picturing a bunch of people, frankly, kind of like me, that are running on the treadmill, listen to this, or walking the dog, or riding in the car, and they literally turn this thing on because maybe got a little bit of a drive or a walk, and before they turned it on to listen or watch this, they got like 10 things as a business owner, like, you know what I mean? Like, there's always that list that never gets ended that you got to get done, the to-do list, and it's easy to just kind of block out everything and just focus on the list. And when those opportunities come for interaction, maybe there's somebody wants you to listen to them, and maybe there's a tendency to cut them short. Does it get easier the more spiritual, mature you get? Like, what advice would you give to that person who's struggling to give that kind of attention and get off their own agenda?
Well, I think you have to realize that your ultimate job on this earth is to serve others.
Yeah.
And as a businessman, you're serving others by giving a good service or product to them. And I have no patience, especially with Wall Street. Like, Wall Street is not immoral or unmoral. They're just amoral. They don't have any. Right. Money is their morality. If it makes $1 and they won't go to jail or be too edged to breaking the law, they'll do it. They don't really care. They just care. They measure their worth by their dollar. So if you measure your life by the impact you can have on others, then you have a whole different standard. And I don't recommend this for other people, but I've never advertised. It's everything I've done, everything I've got is by referral. And you get referrals because you provide excellent service and you take the time. And there's one client that I worked with for 2 years. She was a divorcee and quite well off. She used to work for this fruit company. I think the fruit company is called Apple. It's in the fruit business. Yeah, and turns out their fruit really sells well. And so my wife said, "You'll never get that lady as a client." And I said, "Yes, I will." Because I just spent the time.
Yeah.
And I didn't see her as a person that was a dollar sign. I saw she was an interesting person, very interesting, but she'd been top salesperson at Apple. And I thought she's a really nice, interesting person. So you learn that to appreciate. My view is I was way overeducated, but that happened at about the grade. Third grade, I was educated beyond my intelligence. So ever since then, it's been a downhill slide. And so I know that everyone I meet, no matter who they are, has something to teach me. They know something I don't know. And if I listen carefully, I will learn something. Now, the hardest people to learn anything or teach anything to is a guy with a PhD. So don't even try, because too many of them already know everything.
I've been thinking a lot about this idea of everyone you meet, no matter how they behave on the surface, is an image bearer of God, right? So
Exactly.
I think one of the things you're talking about is seeing everyone in that light. To me, that's a tool that helps me try to listen better, be patient, see their side of things. You know what I mean? And not react maybe to the shell, but to look at what you might learn from them, or just give to them by listening. I think that's really amazing. I also think of, like, since we're in the kind of investment business, it's really an investment you make in getting to know people, right? And just putting people over the tactics or the business success or these sort of things. I just think about Jesus not being in a hurry. I mean, do you find that you've been able to do this more as time has gone on? How has time and your age affected your ability to listen? Have you gotten better at it?
I think you always improve, and you have to pay attention to your last conversation, and you say to yourself, did I really listen well, or did I start talking? And my wife and I had a great relationship, wonderful 62 years of marriage.
Wow.
And we were not, neither one of us drama people.
Yeah.
And we both were problem solvers. And pretty soon, when they met me and my wife, they quickly decided not only was she more beautiful by far, but she is also the smart one. And this other guy, I don't know, how did that guy marry such a beautiful, smart woman? Well, we would both, as I said, have a tendency to problem solve. So we had an agreement. If we just wanted to be listened to without recommendations, we'd say, look, I just want to talk this out. I don't want any recommendations. I just want to talk about the issue. And so we would listen. Either she would listen to me or I'd listen to her. And occasionally, of course, in other conversations, I'd start, being a professor at one stage of my life for 5 years, two different universities, you have a tendency to start pontificating. And she said, you have no idea what you're talking about. And I would burst into laughing and I'd say, give me new information and I'll argue the other side. And because she would pay attention, and if her desk was about 12 feet from mine, she did the bookkeeping, and if I started talking too long, she'd do her hand like that, and I'd see that hand moving, and I thought, shut up and listen. You need to be monitored.
Well, Bill, this is such a great theme, man, and in our busy world,
Yeah,
I can't think of a better message, to slow down and listen, which is where real interaction comes from, and frankly, love. It's a loving thing to do. It just is, and so for somebody struggling with this, they got their to-do list. They tend to prioritize the to-do list maybe over the listening, and they're feeling like they'd like to be a better listener. We always wrap with a practical tip. Maybe what's a practical tip for that person who'd like to be better at this?
Well, I would say the first step would be to practice, of course, and the best place to practice is at home.
Yeah.
And you go home, and however you get in your home, either on your way home, say, I'm going to leave work behind. I am going to start thinking about entering my home and saying to my wife, the first thing I have, how was your day?
Mm-hmm.
And then shut up and listen with interest how her day was. She'll be so shocked that she might not recover because she's used to, she's been hassled. If she has smaller children, she's been hassled. If she has teenagers, she's really been hassled. These beautiful little children catch this disease called teenagerism, and they turn into something like, as I said before, Jekyll and Hyde. They turn into Mr. Hyde, and then hopefully they grow out of it. And of course, when they have their own children, that's our revenge, is when your children have children.
Well, but I like this idea to start at home, because sometimes that's the hardest one. We do bring home work, and we do have a lot of things on our mind, and to just think about laying that down and being on our spouse's agenda, if you will.
Yeah.
Or just listening. What a great place to start. Well, Bill, it's been a joy for me today to listen to you, and I know it has been for our listeners. So thanks so much for being with us and sharing your story and your wisdom with us.
Let me give you a book that the person might want to look at, and that is the Power of a Positive No. The Power of a Positive No. The reason we are so rushed and pushed is because we're not smart enough to say no in a positive way. And if you can't listen right now, if you don't have time to listen right now to whomever, say, right now I'm really pressed. Would it be okay if we set a date for me to call you when I can give you my full attention?
That's a great idea.
If that person doesn't pass out on the phone or wherever, you have to look out you have to be ready to catch people, because when you start giving them attention, they will be so shocked because it's out of character. Nobody does that.
Such a great point. I really like that, because there are times when you don't really have the time to listen well. And instead of being rude and sort of running away, set a time.
Set a time. Yeah. You can't, because you do have things that are urgent. Somebody wants $50,000 sent out of their account, or they want a position sold now. Okay, you got to take care of that, because minutes or seconds make a difference.
Yeah. Got it. Well, this has been so much fun, Bill. Thanks for joining us.
Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
And thanks, everybody, for listening to this week's Generous Business Owner Podcast. Share it with a friend and subscribe, and we'll see you next week. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for listening to the Generous Business Owner Podcast with Jeff Thomas, Alan Barnhart, and Jeff Rutt. Make sure to follow the podcast so you don't miss an episode. You can find the guest contact information in the show notes. Stay tuned for the next episode.